Hey there, I'm Jerry, a DIY track guy, and today we're gonna get pumped. Power steering pumped. Sorry, I know, that's awful. If you couldn't tell from the thumbnail, we're going to be installing an electric hydraulic steering pump from a Volvo into a Miata. This is a pretty common mod on grassroots drift cars and even higher profile builds from Donut Media and Gears and Gasoline. In the Miata scene, the YouTuber Taylor Ray also has one of these installed, but for me, I just want to clear up some space in my engine bay and try something new. This is a comprehensive video where we source, install, and test this mod. It's a little longer than my other videos, but I wanted to make sure that you have all the details so you can do this on your Miata or another car. Do me a favor, please like, subscribe, comment, and share this video. Thanks very much, and let's get right into it. The first thing to do is to hit up a local junkyard in search of a Volvo C30, C70, V50, or S40 from 2006-ish to 2012, but they may come in other models. If you know of any others, please leave a comment. This place is a Kenny U-Pull, and they have many locations across eastern Canada. Unfortunately for me, the Volvo V50 that I've come to see has already donated its power steering pump to somebody else. Darn. But on another day, at another yard, I find this untouched 2010 S40 with its power steering pump hiding behind here. And with the utmost care and respect, I extract it, along with its wiring harness pigtails and mounting bracket. All for a price of about $75 Canadian or less than $50 US. Here we are back in the garage, and let's take a closer look at this thing. Up top we have this plastic reservoir where the fluid goes. Underneath is the electric pump assembly inside this metal housing, and the low pressure return ports here and the high pressure send ports here. These are the two wiring harness connectors. This connector has the 8-gauge power and ground leads, and the other is the CAN bus connector that's got these two twisted wires that communicate with the ECU, and this gray and blue striped trigger wire that powers on the pump. When 12-volt power is supplied to it, after a few seconds the pump will power on and operate in limp mode with about 70% steering assist. And that's the way some folks are happy to run this setup. But I purchased this aftermarket control unit from ServTronic in Leiria, Portugal. I don't think I'm saying that right. It's a surprisingly compact unit with all the logic contained in this small plastic housing, and this connector conveniently plugs into the CAN bus port on the pump. On the other side we have 4 unterminated wires. Black goes to ground, red to switched ignition power, and the gray and yellow wires go to the supplied adjustment knob. So in terms of finding a place to put this pump and reservoir, I think I've decided to put this in the trunk on the left side, on the opposite side of the battery. Directly aft of the fuel filler cover is this cavity behind the rear quarter panel. But test fitting the pump here, I noticed that the jack mount, spot welded to the floor, is kind of in the way, so let's get rid of it. And this is a 15-piece spot weld removal tool that I got from Amazon. It's the first time I'm using these guys, so I center punch the middle of the spot welds, then come in with a drill bit to get a small hole started for each of them. Then I get to drilling with the spot weld removal tool, which basically cuts a circular hole around the weld. And with the spot welds drilled out, the mount is released. Don't mind the hole where I went a bit too far on one of the welds. And underneath is a bump in the sheet metal that I pound flat. And now the pump should fit in there quite nicely. So we're going to reuse this bracket because it has these nice mounting points with rubber isolators that reduce the vibrations generated by the pump. I'm going to reuse this bracket thing here that's already spot welded to the chassis. And I also came up with this bracket system. For the last mounting point, we use this M8 welded nut on the bracket and run a threaded rod down through the floor, sandwiching it with some nuts and washers. To supply power to the pump, we'll use this 80 amp breaker fuse that I got from Amazon. We push the lever down to connect the circuit and press the button to break it. On either side are these clear plastic caps that hide the terminals, which will accept this 4-gauge welding wire that'll go to the battery. Measure once, cut twice. With the battery ground disconnected for safety, we slip an insert onto the 4-gauge cable and connect it into my post-mounted multi-terminal connector that I installed in a previous video. With the pump loosely in its new home, we need to extend the power wire over to the fused breaker and the ground to a chassis ground point. So I made this messy multicolor wiring harness to connect to the breaker and added a copper ring terminal for the ground. To make it look a little less embarrassing and provide some protection, we cover it with a braided sleeve and heat shrink the ends. With the power wire connected up to the fused breaker and the ground wire to the chassis ground point, we can now turn our attention to wiring up the ServTronic controller unit. The first thing to do is to find a place to mount the ServTronic adjustment knob that varies the amount of hydraulic assist, effectively making the steering feel lighter or heavier. So I've pre-drilled a hole in one of the switch blanking plates that sits to the left of the steering wheel and test fit the knob. I think that'll do nicely. Up in the driver's side footwell, we have the interior fuse box where we'll get 12-volt switched ignition power. Notice that I already have a fuse tap or add a circuit on the 15-amp cigar fuse. We'll use that to provide switched power to this small bus bar or power distribution block. It's simply a metal plate that joins all connections onto one circuit, and it'll live up here next to the fuse box. This area in here underneath the parcel shelf left of the gas tank is a pass-through for some stock wiring, so we'll follow the same routing for our new wiring harness. Here's where it'll poke into the interior, directly beside my roll bar, and we'll run it up along the door sill to the fuse box area. Now about that ServTronic power steering controller, first we extend the black ground wire and put a ring on it. And for the other three, we also need to extend them with long lengths of primary wire to reach up into the cabin. Next, we mount up the ServTronic unit in front of the pump with a couple of riv nuts and screws. And the ground wire can go to the same chassis ground point that we used earlier. Now we tape the harness to a straightened out coat hanger, poke it into the pass-through, and pull it into the interior. With the side panel removed and the carpet lifted, we'll route the harness along the stock wiring and through this plastic wiring channel up to the fuse box area. So with the harness here, it can come up along this stock wiring, up and over the fuse box to our power distribution bus bar. But it's pretty cramped in here, so it's going to get a bit fiddly. You know, to be honest, you got a better view of this than I do. Maybe you should do this. Ring terminal. There's no clearance here for me to put a riv nut or anything to mount this properly, so this is just going to have to do. Good enough. Or as we say around these parts, close enough for Canada. And finally, we mount that adjustment knob that can vary the amount of power steering assist into the dash with the blanking plate that we modified earlier. This sits it in a perfect spot directly to the left of the steering wheel. All right, we got the pump in place here temporarily. I wanted to test something out before I do the next step, and that is just to make sure that this pump works and all the wiring I did works. I don't want to burn out this pump because there's no fluid in here, so let me hit the breaker again. With the pump and wiring working, we now need to make the hydraulic lines. Up here on the left side of the engine compartment, looking down at the steering rack, we see the low pressure return line with a rubber hose connected here, and the high pressure send line with a steel braided hose connected, kinda hidden down here. As a reminder, my car has an Ecotec Miata engine swap, so your stock motored Miata will look different, but the steering rack is the same. Up here is a Buick power steering pump that's compatible with the swap. The stock Miata one looks different, but functions the same way. We disconnect the high pressure line from the pump, as well as the low pressure return line. Then down on the steering rack, we remove both lines. And here's what it looks like. Notice the high pressure port already has a -6AN adapter installed, which you'll need to source. I'm pretty sure it's an M16 by 1.5 fitting, but double check that for yourself. And on the pump itself, these are the two ports that we're going to be working on. This is the high pressure one, this is the return one. And removing the stock fitting, we see that it's got an O-ring. So we need to use a -6AN to M16 by 1.5 O-ring seal adapter, like this stainless steel Russell one, part number in the description. You could also go with an aluminum fitting, but the pump body's steel and you're supposed to match materials. And the return port's just plastic, so we can use 3/8 rubber fuel line hose. Oh, don't tell me I'm so dumb. Duh. This kind of always happens. Look at this. I got the connector down in between the bracket here. So now I gotta take it out again to get this connector free. And in the left rear wheel well, I removed the liner to give us access to drill some holes. And now it's time to make that high pressure line from the pump to the steering rack. And for that, we're gonna use this Evil Energy PTFE fuel hose and fitting kit. I used this in another part of the build. Check that out up here. It comes with quite an assortment of fittings, which is kind of why I bought it. That and the price was good. And I got the 16-foot variety. They do have 10 feet as well, but I wasn't sure if that would make it from the rack in the engine bay all the way out to the trunk. So I figured a little bit of extra doesn't hurt. So here we are at my trusty bench vise. You've seen me do this job before, so I figured I'd try to spice things up to make this a little more exciting. Now, with a 90-degree AN fitting properly installed on our PTFE hose, we thread that onto that high-pressure adapter fitting on the rack. Under the car, we route the line along the left-hand frame rail and up through that hole into the trunk. Now we can install another 90-degree fitting onto the line and thread that onto the high-pressure port's -6AN adapter fitting that we installed earlier. It's all coming together. Right, and for that return line, we're just using 3/8 30R7 standard push lock fuel hose. I've used this stuff before too. Check out that video in the upper right corner after finishing this one. Obviously no fittings needed here. We simply slide it onto the low pressure port on the steering rack with an appropriately sized spring clamp, run it under the car along with the PTFE line, securing it with certified racing spec zip ties, pass it up through the hole into the trunk and slide it onto the pump's return port with another spring clamp. So all the hardware is installed here and it should work okay. We just need to fill this thing with fluid, but I don't have any. So let's go out to the store and get some. This is Canadian Tire, a cultural icon where I live that, despite its name, has a greater selection of toaster ovens and coffee makers than actual tires. But they also carry a selection of oils, including this Valvoline fully synthetic automatic transmission fluid. I think one bottle should be enough, but let's get two just to be safe. And Valvoline, please, seriously, please sponsor me. The unfortunate part of mounting the pump in this location is that there's not a lot of clearance between the top of the reservoir and the inside of the body here. And that's why I quickly threw together this thing. The Mazda spec for the rack is Dexron 3, and this is rated for Dexron 6, so we're good. But it's worth noting the Volvo pump wants CHF rated fluid, which this isn't. Running the Valvoline may risk damaging the pump, but I'd rather that than potentially risking damage to my steering rack. All right, ignition on. This seems dry. Now the wheels are off the ground, so this should be really easy to turn, but let's just give it a couple of lock to lock to try to get some of the air out of the system. Interesting, once it hits lock, you can hear the whine of the pump change. Engage max power. Yeah, I can't feel any difference now because there's no resistance, but it seems to be working. All right guys, this thing is so sick. It actually works, and this adjustment knob actually works a treat as well. They say that the adjustment of this takes about 3 seconds for the pump to respond, but it seemed pretty quick to me, but I guess we won't know until we take it out on the road and give it a try. Well, first I gotta get all this stuff put back together in there and over there. All right, we're pretty much done here, and I'm pretty happy with the way this turned out. We got the power steering pump out of the way, put the alternator directly onto the engine block. As well, we had to remove this long accessory belt, and on there right now is a Dayco 5PK0875, and we got the intake manifold back on along with the throttle body, and now we just need to put this intake back on. All right, let's take this thing for a test drive. I've got the adjuster turned all the way to the right clockwise to the max assist setting. At this low speed residential street type driving, the steering feels exactly the same. Just a steady, consistent, properly boosted power steering. Now let me turn the adjuster all the way counterclockwise to the minimum assist setting. Okay, yeah, I can feel the assist level has diminished a bit, but it's nowhere near like a depowered steering rack. Let me stop at a parking lot up here. Here we are back at the max setting, and can I rotate this wheel with one finger? Yes. It's not effortless, but it's relatively easy. And using this luggage scale, we can see that it takes exactly 6 pounds to get it to move. Now on the minimum setting, okay, it's harder now with the luggage scale. And we can see it takes 7.5 pounds to rotate it. All right, so with the car off, obviously there's zero power steering, so this is pretty much impossible to move with one finger. 20.9 pounds. I wish I had some other data points for a depowered rack, a factory manual rack, and stock power steering. If you have any of those numbers, please leave a comment below and I'll add them to the description. Thanks. Okay. Yeah, we're seeing something here. I feel like it's getting heavier as we transition from one direction to the other. Let me crank it up to max here. Yeah, that feels better. There's no kind of dip in power. What happens if I put it into the middle? Feels pretty good. Okay, yeah, we're learning something here. So what's the point of doing this somewhat tedious modification? Well, depowering a stock Miata rack is a super common, pretty much free mod that's done with the intent of increasing steering feel. Now, I've driven street and race Miatas with depowered racks, and sure, you can feel everything, but it's not without its noticeable trade-offs. Like on track in high-speed sweeping turns, holding the turn radius can take quite a bit of effort. And when things get more slidey, as they often do, sure, you can catch it, but quickly returning the wheel to center, especially when you get more angle, can be pretty tough without a powered rack. Finally, yes, you knew it was coming. Parking lot speed maneuverability is significantly compromised with a depowered rack. But what's that? I can almost hear the collective, bro, you even lift? Yeah, I get it. You're an absolute beast of a unit. But for me, a guiding principle for this build is that I'd like my wife to be able to drive this car, and there's absolutely no way she would without power steering. If you have a depowered steering rack and you're having some regrets, you might want to consider the e-power steering EPS that I helped my friend Jesse install on his Miata. Check out that video up here. But if you have a powered rack and you feel it's a little over boosted, or you just want to get that pump and reservoir out of the engine bay, then this Volvo EHPS system is a great budget, grassroots DIY option. The pump itself is only about $40 to maybe $80 from your local junkyard. The wiring's pretty much free, and you just need to buy the hydraulic lines of your choice. This ServTronic controller is really reasonably priced, or if you feel like it, you could DIY one yourself using Arduinos, and even without a controller, the pump will run at about a 70 to 75% duty cycle, so that's totally usable. But being able to adjust the amount of power steering assist with this little knob, even though it's not a huge range, is pretty awesome. Finally, there's got to be some downsides, right? Well, yeah, the pump weighs 11 pounds plus the lines, and that's about 1.5 to 2 pounds heavier than my previous power steering pump and reservoir. So there's a bit of a penalty there. And there's the small matter of that electric motor whine. Can you hear it? Yeah, me too. Also, other than that, there's the cost of the pump, wiring, lines, and the controller, plus the hassle of installing it, all to replace a working existing power steering system, which when you put it that way, sounds kind of dumb. So that's the Volvo electro-hydraulic power steering system install, test, and review. I hope you enjoyed that one. I certainly did. Until next time, you're awesome. I'm useless. Thanks for watching.